Hello, friends. Welcome to the Case for Life podcast. I'm your host, Scott Klusendorf, president of Life Training Institute, and our aim here is to help you think clearly on pro-life issues. Today, I have a special friend with me, a guy I've grown to appreciate and value over the last year or so. His name is Jason Storms. He's with Operation Save America. Jason is a pastor. He is a guy who is passionate about defending the lives of the unborn, and I love the phrase in the Bible about iron sharpening iron, and this is a brother that I feel helps me do that. And we have been able to help each other think clearly about things. And one of the things I appreciate about Jason, he's not only a sharp thinker, not only a passionate defender of the lives of the unborn, and he's godly, but also that even though he and I disagree on a few points around the edges, we have been able to model, I think, a very civil engagement, and we have helped each other think rather than attack one another needlessly. And I really appreciate that about you, Jason, your willingness to be a thoughtful brother who can challenge. You're not afraid to challenge, but you're also very gracious in the way you do it. And it's a joy to have you with us today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Scott. Thank you very much.
So our listeners can know a little bit about you. Give us, your story is very powerful. Your testimony about your early life and how you came into the movement of saving children. Can you give us a thumbnail sketch of that?
Yeah, I grew up in a broken family. Mom was a teenager, had me and my brother. Was pressured to abort us. Thankfully, she didn't. She couldn't do that. And but we grew up wild. And so, kind of typical products of the culture. And oddly enough, my dad was a pastor in New Orleans, and so, but I didn't see him a lot, didn't interact with him through a lot of my childhood. Although I did spend time with him, lived with him for short stints, and visited him at different stints of my childhood in New Orleans, and saw real Christianity, and it impacted me. But at 14 years old, I walked away from. I denounced Christianity officially, kind of spiraled downwards, seeking for, what is the purpose of life, and wound up basically homeless drug addict at 18 years old, living in San Jose, California. And, had a girlfriend who had an abortion. I was very consenting to that and sort of just, indifferent to it. Ended up kind of hitting bottom. My dad reached out to me, invited me to come to New Orleans, and bought me a bus ticket to head down there. I turned 19 on a Greyhound bus in the middle of Texas. And so 4 days on that bus, the Lord was convicting me. Got into New Orleans with my dad, and he was having a Bible study at a little apartment he had there in the city, and just the words of Scripture jumping off the page at me, and just the sincerity of the people, and their kindness, their love, just Christ shining and radiating through them just was powerful. And so after a couple of weeks of wrestling with my dad, I had all these questions, well, why would God make the world and send everybody to hell and all this kind of stuff? How can you trust the Bible? So my dad just patiently worked through my skepticism with me, brought me to church, and I, felt the presence of God there powerfully, and knew I was a sinner, and so was broken before the Lord, and he drew me to himself, and, deep repentance and transformation of my life at 19 years old. And then my dad began to take me to an abortion clinic to minister the gospel and to reach out to the women there. And I was confronted, with what I had been consenting to just a year previously. And, my heart broke in seeing the reality of abortion, seeing what takes place there, what abortion really is, stripping away the euphemisms and the rhetoric, and really just looking at the body of a little dismembered human being, and studying that out, and, really grabbed my heart. And so I had a passion for evangelism and for the preborn, and been engaged in that fight now for 26 years, and so been blessed to work with a lot of good people around the country, and Lord has blessed me with a beautiful family now, and we've run a construction business, and we just had our 11th child, blessed to homeschool 11 children, and seeing my kids now and my adult children. You've met, know you met my daughter, Julia. To see my kids now standing, taking the baton and standing on the front lines, and being an influence.
Speaking of standing on the front lines, you recently testified in front of a Wisconsin House committee. I watched that video. It was powerful. Bring us in on what your main points were to that committee, and what you saw as some deficiencies in the way they were approaching the abortion issue.
Yeah, as you know, Scott, there's this move within the Republican leadership, which really is not anything new. I would say they're just being more explicit about what
Yep.
they've sort of held in private previously, and that is that we need to distance ourselves from the abortion issue. We can't win on this. We're going to lose at the ballot, and if we lose power, well, then we're giving power over to the Democrats, and they're going to be far worse. So you're better off, at least with us. At least you're going to get some things. And so this has sort of been the position that pro-lifers have been in for a long time. Principled pro-lifers who care about this issue and want to stand on principle. And so we've seen that in our state of Wisconsin, where we just lost last year a big governor's race, and then we lost a big state Supreme Court race. And so our
Yep.
state Supreme Court has shifted. And so the prevailing consensus of a lot of people is, well, we lost an abortion. The Democrats spent a ton of money in their campaign talking about abortion. And so the prevailing consensus is, well, we can't win. Look, we lost. They made abortion a big part of the campaign, and we were defeated. But here's the reality. Both Republican candidates in both situations, they never responded to all the attacks against them. They never gave a passionate and articulate and persuasive voice to the pro-life position. They just were silent. They hid. They didn't want to engage the issue. And obviously, if you don't engage the issue, you're going to lose. When you let the other side dictate the narrative and frame the discussion, of course you're going to lose. So my argument to we have a Republican supermajority still in our legislature, and so this is a Republican-controlled committee. And what they were doing is they were bringing forth a bill to legalize abortion up to 14 weeks in our state. But they weren't just trying to pass a bill to legalize abortion. What the bill was going to do is put it on the ballot for the people to decide. And they're really kind of going to be a Pontius Pilate. We wash our hands of this. This is what the people want. We're going to let the people vote and decide. We didn't decide. This wasn't our decision. When in reality, it certainly was. And so, I called them out on it. I said, this is cowardice. This is.
You sure did.
Yeah, this is a failure of backbone. This is not a debate over tax rates. We're talking about the killing of precious little human beings made in God's image, the very foundation of our system of government, of our value system here in this country, and cuts to the very core of human rights and human dignity. And if we can't stand on that and articulate that and defend that, then what are we fighting for? We've already lost the game. And so I just encouraged those guys to stand on principle. And of course, many of them profess to be Christians. Many of them even said in the hearings, I'm 100% pro-life. And then they began to give reasons why a 14-week ban was acceptable to them and reasonable. And so I said, it's not reasonable. I said to them, you can't get an abortion in France, liberal France, after 12 weeks.
Yeah.
So your idea
That
of
was
a reasonable pro-life compromise is something that would be considered liberal in liberal France. How absurd. And so it's really just, it's not indicative of where the culture is per se in a state like Wisconsin, where you can stand on a pro-life position and win. It's indicative of the cowardice of the Republican Party in their lack of seeing abortion for what it is. I think a lot of these guys, even the ones that profess to be pro-life, they just really don't have, I think, the proper heart on the matter and understand what it is we're talking about. And seeing the horrific reality of abortion, I think it needs to come into focus for them because they speak about it so dispassionately. They speak about it as though it's sort of just another issue. And this is just an issue. Abortion, something, I'm pro-life, and so, it's like when you really understand the reality of what is taking place inside abortion clinics and the depravity of that and how pervasive it is across our culture and what it has done to the conscience of our nation, of course, you're going to be motivated to speak with some passion. And it's like, if we're not outraged, if we who are pro-life are not outraged about it, how can we expect the culture to be outraged? We can persuade
Correct.
hearts and minds if we speak on it passionately and persuasively, and our Republican leaders have just simply failed to do that.
Yeah, there's a real problem with our politicians saying they are willing to settle for a 15-week ban and go no further and stop there. And I don't care if you view yourself as an incrementalist or not, that ought to bother you, whatever your pro-life perception is, because There's no excuse when you have a supermajority. We've got Roe v. Wade out of the way. There is no excuse for not pushing for much stronger legislation than a lot of our politicians want to do. And I thought your rebuke to the committee was both pastoral and thoughtful, and we're going to link to it in the show notes so people can actually see what you said to that committee. But it's a message that a lot of pro-lifers don't want to stand up and fight for, and especially in our political classes. They seem content to just want to keep the status quo, and that's not going to get it done. And I loved what you said. We got to stand up and fight for this stuff. You know, it's funny, when you stand up and fight, you win a few battles, but you're going to miss 100% of the swings you never take. And
That's
a lot
right.
of people on our side, I think, don't want to fight. They just want this issue to go away. And when pro-lifers work to help them in aid in making the issue just go away, this is not good for our side.
100%. Yeah, there's a difference between, being pragmatic about how do we save as many lives as we can versus this kind of pragmatism of how do I save myself? How do I avoid
Yes.
personal hardship? How do I avoid, and that is the pragmatism that has captured much of the Republican leadership.
Well,
What is
imagine if
what
we
is the
had
path
a
of least
governor.
resistance?
Yeah. Imagine if we had a governor that said this: I'm against spousal abuse, but I don't want to ban it outright because, after all, there are some men that, hey, they've never learned to stop being boys, and boys will be boys, and they may knock their wives around a little bit if their wives burn supper, don't have the house clean, or withhold things the man may want. So, to be pragmatic, I think what we need to do is say, you can't beat your wife if she's younger than 50. But if you do that, you're settling on a principle. That's very different than a governor who is committed to saving all women from spousal abuse, but he doesn't have the votes to do it. So he keeps coming back for more and more and more. He'll save as many as he can along the way, but he will never accept the principle that it's okay to set some women aside to be abused. He will fight until he can save them all. And what concerns me right now about a lot of our Republican leaders, from Donald Trump on down, I'm hearing people say, let's go for a national 15-week ban and make that our stopping point. And I'm like, no way, you can't do that. That's a compromise position.
Yeah, yeah, it's an absurdity, and we lose credibility when we say things like that, because even the radical pro boards are pointing out, and they pointed out in that committee hearing, and of course we hear it on the streets and campuses and all the time in public discourse. You claim that you believe these are babies that are being murdered, that this is the killing of an innocent human being, and yet you think a 15-week ban is acceptable? You're going to offer that, as a sacrifice, on the altar of convenience. And so, as you know, and you take we both are apologists and take apologetics very seriously. And I've learned much from you over the years, and that you've done phenomenal work in the area of pro-life apologetics. And, the arguments matter, and the arguments matter when it comes to policy. And I think principle and logical and moral consistency should be driving our policy decisions, not just looking for the path of least resistance and where we can lock arms with our enemies.
Yeah.
But if we can strongly articulate our core fundamental principle, these are human beings made in the image of God from the moment of conception, and we can showcase and highlight the beauty of that precious embryo, that precious fetus, of that precious baby growing in the womb, and we can really highlight that, stand on that, articulate that, show that to people. And then say, what's wrong with protecting these human beings, protecting every single one of them? That's our position, without compromise. Because to do anything other than that, then we're now compromising our moral principles. We're now undermining our very core argument, and it's taking the wind out of our own sails. And so a lot of times, I think what happens when you do things like a 15-week ban and these types of things is there's a lot of collateral damage that is not even realized, aside from the fact that you're leaving out 99% of abortions. It's like, here's an example. In South Dakota years ago, they passed, or they put a referendum on the ballot, life at conception, and it lost 55-45. And they came back and they said, well, people want rape and incest exceptions, and that's what the other side attacked. Oh my goodness, there's no exceptions for rape? What about a 14-year-old girl that is raped? And they're great at telling those stories. But so, they came back a year or two later and they put it on the ballot, life at conception, but they put exceptions for rape and incest. And guess what? It lost again 55-45. It didn't persuade people in the middle. So there's I think a delusion, and I think some people do this intentionally, but others are just, I think, naive in this. But what are we gaining by putting in these compromises? Do we really think that radical pro-abortion people or strongly committed pro-choice people are going to be like, oh, that's more reasonable. Now I'll side with you pro-lifers.
Yeah.
These
people
no,
are not
we
our
don't.
friends, and they're not going to side with us.
No, we can, you can say, well, let's do a heartbeat bill. How about a 6-week? Is that reasonable? No, for them it's not reasonable, and they're going to say arguments. They're going to, of course, find the weakest link in an argument and go for that and attack that. But giving them a concession on that argument doesn't pacify them. As you know, here's a reality, right? We have in all the states that have banned abortion. In our state, Wisconsin was one of those states. We had a law from 1849 that went into effect after Dobbs in it, and so for a year and a half, our abortion clinics were closed. Abortion went under our homicide statutes, and we had a Democrat governor and Republican legislator that were sort of at a stalemate. The Republican leadership wanted to soften that bill; they didn't want to defend it, But the Democrat, he wasn't going to accept any compromises, and he's already said he's going to veto the 14-week ban. But in our state, of course, there's no punishment for the mothers, and it's a controversial topic. You and I can hash through. But so moms in our state and in every state that's banned abortion, they can still get order abortion pills, get them delivered to their home, and have self-managed abortions. So if a 15-year-old girl is raped, can still order abortion pills and have an abortion with legal immunity in every state in this country. But what are the advertisements and the campaign commercials that were being run in our state, that are being run in every state that they've banned abortion? Is they're saying, oh my goodness, the Republicans are so radical. Women who are raped can't get an abortion. They're forced to go to another state. They're forced to, but that's not even true. So they're not even being honest about the present reality. So again, capitulating to their arguments is not how we win. In fact, it's proven to be a recipe of how we continue to be defeated. And I think we need to stop doing that.
As you talked to that committee, was there anybody that was tracking with you that you felt was understanding what you were trying to say, or was it no one really was? What was your read on that?
Yeah, there was definitely people, and there was a few that we had communication with. There was a guy in the committee who I had knocked doors for, and he spoke to some of our people in the hallway prior to and afterwards and said he's wrestling over whether to do it. So here's the dynamic: is the Speaker of our House in our state. His name's Robin Voss. He is the epitome of a swamp dwelling rhino, right? Shrewd politician.
There's a phrase.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. He is a shrewd politician. He has won a lot of elections in our state, and like I said, we have a Republican supermajority. But he goes to the Republicans in the caucus, and he tells them, you will not talk about abortion. You will not talk about it on the floor. You won't talk about it on the campaign trail. We're not going to talk about abortion. You'll get one pro-life bill each legislative session, and it better not be too extreme. And he literally has punished pro-life legislators by drawing them out of their own district. He's redrawn their district, and they have a consolidation of power in our state. He pulls them off of committees, strips their name off of any bills, and just neutralizes them, demonizes them, and then of course even will run primary candidates against them. And from the Republican Party coffers, they will fund primary challengers to unseat sitting Republicans because they dare to challenge him and stand up and speak about the issue of abortion in a way that he doesn't approve of. So this is really his baby. This was his baby in our state. He pushed this through very quickly. And that committee, looking at the faces of many of the Republicans, they could see the truth of what I was saying. And I could see a lot of shame in their faces, and they understood, I think, a lot of what I was saying. But they're more afraid of Robin Voss than they are of the pro-life voting base. And it's why I emphasized in there that, we're going to come expose you in your district, and we have to do that. And if necessary, we'll run a primary challenger against you. Because if you won't stand on this principle,
they should be primaried.
They should be. They need to be. And we have to be willing to play political hardball and not accept the excuses that they're going to say as well. Jason, I'm between a rock and a hard place here. You got to be understanding. Well, we elected you to stand on life. If you can't do that, then we've got to find somebody else who's willing to do that. And
Yeah.
And we
I
got to be willing to
think
fight
that
those battles.
we got to be very insistent that our politicians walk the talk. And when they are willing to settle for setting aside an entire class of human beings that they will acceptably say we can kill, that's just not something principled pro lifers can allow to happen. And that is, again, very different than pushing to protect all children, but finding in the heat of the legislative moment, you don't have the votes to protect all of them, so you protect as many as you can, but then you come right back to get the rest. You don't ever give up. It's what Doug Wilson calls smash mouth incrementalism, the idea that we're not going away until we protect all of them. And that leads to something you brought up a moment ago, and I thought I'd go ahead and just go there. You brought
All
up
right.
there's discussion about what penalties should be for women who have abortions in states where it's been outlawed. Go ahead and speak to that, because you and I have had some friendly discussions about this. We don't necessarily see eye to eye on it, but one of the things, again, I really appreciate about you is we can sit down and have a conversation about this, and we don't attribute to each other the worst possible motives. We don't poison the well. We talk about these things, and there has been a lot of friction between abolitionists and pro-lifers that has been nasty. We'll say both sides. And I think there's a way to model a discussion that involves, hey, let's put forth our positions and do our best to make our case and see where it all, hashes out. And I think that's what we've tried to do. But go ahead and speak to this issue of what the consequences should be if a woman were to have an abortion in a state where it's outlawed.
Great question. Excuse me. And I would just echo and heartily agree with you that we should be able to speak with respect to each other. And even when we disagree on this, you look at the enemies that are arrayed against us culturally, the enemies of Christ, the enemies of the values we hold dear. My disagreements with you, Scott, are not something that's going to cause me to stop pointing my gun down range and turn and point it at somebody who's on my side. I know that you're not in this for the money, and that's been one of the things that's been said about you, and it's unfortunately there are some abolitionists that will make those types of ad hominem attacks, and that's not helpful. You obviously could be having a much more peaceful life in somewhere in corporate America, making a lot more money than you make without all the headache and death threats and attacks that you get from the pro-abortion world. So I know that you stand and fight for this because you're passionate about it. And it's with much sacrifice that you do that. And I applaud that. And you're a brother in Christ, and getting to sit down and talk to you and hear your heart and see you, I know that you're a brother in Christ, and I should see and view you as such, even when we disagree. And we can have those discussions, in a setting like this, or even privately, as we've done at your place, where we can sit down and calmly discuss the issues and have a passionate back and forth, but respectfully as brothers in Christ. And then we go fight our real enemies. You're not the reason why abortion is still legal, and neither are the really committed pro-life people. And you've made this argument before that I think is helpful for some abolitionists to understand, who can paint with too broad of a brush sometimes about the pro-life movement as though it's some just blob, it's some monolithic entity that is systematically trying to keep abortion legal and deceive the masses. There are pro-life organizations that I think are deeply compromised that I would not align myself with. There are pro-life organizations that I think are well-intentioned but are weak and just sort of pushover, much like a lot of the modern evangelical church, the squishy evangelifish, the squishy, seeker-friendly. I don't think many times those people are ill-motived. I think they're doing what they think is helpful in bringing people to Christ or in accomplishing things. I think there's just a lack of courage and fortitude that is needed in this fight. And so, that's where I think, what abolitionists have tried to bring to the table that has been helpful is some fight and some spunk and some passion and some, hey, babies are being murdered, let's act like it. So, again, I think dialogue is very helpful, but also, a good dose of humility and a good dose of charity goes a long way in these discussions in helping us actually protect lives and glorify Christ as we need to do. So, into the topic of mothers and punishments for mothers. I think my position in one sense is quite simple, although there is obviously a lot of nuance that can be fleshed out about it. But I think the argument would be simply this, that if a mother knowingly understands what she's doing, she's not being coerced, she understands that she has a baby growing inside of her, and she chooses to go and kill that child or seek the killing of that child, she needs to be held accountable by law. And that's because that's the way that the law works. That's how justice works. And so it's not that we want
Now,
to
I know there are
punish.
some pro-lifers who say a woman who has an abortion should never have any consequences. That's actually
Correct.
not my position. My
Right.
position is there should be consequences for intentionally killing an innocent human being, but as to what those consequences will be is going to turn on a number of factors that reflect the realities of our legal system at the moment and reflect how we are approaching saving children moving forward. You used a very important term a moment ago about a woman knowing. And I think that's where there's a bit of a gray area where we say, okay, a woman knows what she's doing. She knows she's having an abortion. She knows she's killing her child. And that may be true. But the legal threshold being that to prove that the mother is a co-conspirator with the doctor, and in order to prosecute her for murder the way you might want to prosecute or hopefully would prosecute the doctor for murder, you're going to have to prove that she has an exact understanding of the act as he does. They've got to match perfectly. A meeting of the minds is the legal term for it. And the idea being that if you cannot prove that she has an exact match of the meeting of the minds, they certainly do meet with the minds and that they agree to the abortion. But beyond that, there is the issue that the abortion doctor knows things different than the mother. Now, as Christians, you and I could say, well, wait a minute, that woman in her heart of hearts knows what she's doing is sinful and wrong, and I would concur with that. But the legal threshold is different in the sense that they demand an exact match. And so that does present some challenges as to how we prosecute. So my position has been we should prosecute the mothers, and I would prosecute them at this point for a lesser crime, namely a conspiracy to do an illegal act. And as the culture and juries and DAs become more willing to prosecute, then the penalties can increase and change to reflect that reality.
Yeah, interesting. So, I don't disagree with a lot of that, although I do disagree with some of that. So,
That's
I
okay.
think,
That's why we're
yeah,
friends that
yeah, yeah. I
discuss.
think, and I'm happy to hear you say, obviously, that there has to be some accountability, because I think that's an
There
important
does.
threshold there. In the posture of, say, National Right to Life, Susan B. Anthony, some bigger lobbying groups, I mean, they've just come out unequivocally. There should never, ever be a situation where we want to punish women. And I just think that's ludicrous. And I think even they know that that's not a logically consistent position. I think they're doing that because they know that I think they're trying to take that argument off the table, and it's a
Yeah.
very pragmatic, strategic maneuver. The problem is, of course, is let's say, I consent to the argument and say, okay, many women don't actually know what they're doing. There is a profound ignorance here, and they don't realize they're actually killing a human life. Well, if that were, and they're in some sense victims of a deranged culture that's misled them, and of an abortion industry that has lied to them, which certainly is true to a certain extent. I think every young person growing up in this culture is in one sense a victim of gross propaganda and seduction and all sorts of things, but that doesn't take away personal culpability, right? So I think the question that I would ask many of the pro-life leaders and have is okay, how do we get to this place? If women are genuinely ignorant that they're killing a human life, well, then the pro-life movement certainly has to bear some culpability in that. Because we've been saying the same exact thing. We've been saying you're victims, you don't know what you're doing. So, the way that it's kind of like the argument, if you find yourself in a hole and you've dug yourself into a hole, what's the first thing you do? Well, you stop digging, And so
Yeah.
we need to stop saying mothers are victims. We need to stop saying women don't know what they're doing. We need to start saying, Mom, you have a baby. We just, and as you know, the apologetic arguments, the arguments that we try to bring to the culture, and with ultrasound technology, with the work of many pro-life and abolitionist groups around the country who are bringing this argument to the streets and to the culture and engaging. I think that we're at a place where the vast majority of women who get abortions know very well what they're doing. They know that they're killing a little human life. And so, but here's where the argument, I think, where there's talking past each other on this at times, is there's a difference between, say, what a prosecutor and a judge is going to render, say, in sentencing, versus what a jury is going to say in terms of just guilt or innocence, right? So there's a difference between how we write laws and then how those laws are applied in individual situations in terms of the sentencing. To give some examples, right? So a mother, let's say, who kills her 1-year-old child, right, drowns her, or shakes her in a fit of rage and kills the child, or is passes out on drugs and rolls over her and suffocates the baby. Different scenarios where in all those situations that baby is afforded full equal protection under the law. Our laws don't say it's murder to kill an infant, but here are the exceptions. We don't write exceptions or exemptions into the law for any other class of human beings. We never write a law that says, murdering an infant, killing an infant is murder. But if the mom does it, we don't want to put moms in jail, and so we're going to explicitly exempt them from punishment. You don't write laws that way. That's up to the discretion of prosecutors and judges, right? And so they're going to look at the case, and they're going to look at the mother will be guilty of killing her child, but in terms of the punishment that's executed, that's up to the discretion of the prosecutors and gauging culpability and intent and motive and premeditation and all those various factors that go into, say, manslaughter, first, second, third degree homicide, in the different ways that we parse that out, which of course we even see in Scripture, and that premeditation, lying in wait to kill somebody versus in the heat of passion or self-defense. These different things constitute different categories of manslaughter versus homicide and what degree of homicide. So clearly there's going to be some nuance when mothers abort their children in there in terms of culpability. Another analogy or example I'd use is, say, for example, gang activity. There's thousands of people that are killed through violent gangs, drive-by shootings. So you imagine a carload of young gang members go and do a drive-by shooting. Well, let's say you got a 30-year-old gang member in there who's got a long rap sheet, has murdered people in the past, been to prison, leading the gang, and he's got his 15-year-old little cousin in there who this is his first time ever doing this, has been pressured by the gang, was just jumped into the gang. They both are pulling the triggers of their weapons, both murder people. The law applies equally. You killed a person because that person has value, because that person you killed has value. Across the board, our law says you kill that person, you're going to be held accountable. Anybody involved in the killing of that person is going to be held accountable. We want equal justice. Yet prosecutors, of course, have the discretion to look at that and see this person is far more culpable in the act than this person, and they can show leniency and extend mercy, to that young gang member, right? For example, in that situation. So even in this, if we have all that to say, if we have a law that says, for example, like the law we have in Georgia, you and I have discussed our Bill of Equal Protection in Georgia. Our Bill of Equal Protection in Georgia, all it simply says is, it doesn't say anything about punishing mothers. It doesn't say anything about mothers at all. It just simply says, treat preborn children like born children. The same laws that apply to a born child, we're going to apply that law to a preborn child. And so the same type of discretionary considerations in any murder, any homicide, any killing are obviously going to still be weighed and taken into consideration in the killing of the preborn child, right? And so discretion and mercy and leniency can be, of course, shown to a mother, depending on a wide variety of factors. Certainly if she's coerced or anything like that.
In your mind, Jason, would it be a compromise for pro-lifers to say, let's pass a bill protecting all unborn children from conception? The law says you cannot have an abortion at any point in the pregnancy, from conception through birth. But the law does not expressly prosecute women for murder. And the reason why the pro-lifer would write that bill is this, that it could, if you are known for having a bill that allows for women to be prosecuted for murder, you put unborn lives at risk in other states where there are lawmakers reluctant to pass pro-life legislation with teeth in it protecting all children, and it will scare skittish pro-lifers like the ones you testified in front of in Wisconsin from doing anything substantial to protect these children. If you took the penalty out for the sake of making sure we could protect more children elsewhere, would that be a compromise in principle, or would that just be a prudent move for now until we get the culture more aligned with a biblical worldview on pro-life?
Yeah, well, I would say it would be a compromise in principle, but I don't think a compromise in principle necessarily is wrong in a given context. There can be a time, for example, to lie to save a life.
Well, I'm thinking, for example,
but
that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I say, but I think it would be I don't think that would be a prudent move, because I think what that is doing is it's capitulating to the very source of the problem in, for example, pro-life states, which is the lack of fortitude in our Republican leaders to do what they know they ought to do. And so I think that, one, we need to example courage and a passionate, straightforward approach to the issue, where we stand and say, these are babies that are being murdered. We believe that, and we're going to act like that, and we expect you to act like that, and we're going to have the debate, we're going to have the discussion, but we're not going to soften the force of reason and logic and moral weight that we're going to bring to bear upon you, and we're going to bring that heavy weight of the force of logic to shore up the weak individuals who are going to want to be squeamish, right? And so I think we need leaders who will stand firm and confident when others are faltering, and say, no, here we stand. We can do no other. We have to stand upon this principle. These are babies. Every single one of them needs to be protected without compromise. But then the other side of that as well, that I think is important here, is I think it's important we lead with our strongest arguments, and our policies should follow the force and the strength of our strongest principle positions, right? Our principles should drive policy, and the force and the weight and the strength of our arguments should be what drive policy. And I think that's one of the big problems when we say we make a persuasive argument and a passionate argument that is compelling for the humanity of the preborn child, and we say, life begins at conception, and we lay this out, and that you are a human being deserving of love, deserving of protection, and this is just a grotesque, horrific evil that we're tolerating in our culture. But I'm willing to compromise and accept, killing is okay in these circumstances, or exemptions can be made in these circumstances. We undermine all that force, and I think pragmatically, prudentially, that's not helpful.
If I understand you correctly, you would, though, support a bill that banned all abortion from conception, and you would say we'll save as many babies as we can if that was the best you could get out of a state legislature at this particular point in history. You wouldn't let babies die who could have been saved because there wasn't a provision for prosecuting the mothers. And the reason I bring this up is I asked an abolitionist this when he was accusing me of wanting murderers to get off scot-free and participating with Planned Parenthood. That's what he accused me of. And so I tried to be gracious, but I asked the question, hey, if there were a bill that protected all children from conception, but there wasn't a provision for prosecuting women for murder, would you vote to save the babies, or would you let those babies die because you couldn't prosecute the women? And he said he didn't want to answer the question. He was really, in my view, willing to let those children die because he couldn't prosecute the mothers. And I don't hear you saying that. I hear you saying we should be holistic. Our ethics should apply logically and consistently, and we shouldn't shy away from there being consequences. But is there room within a discussion of people of good faith to say, all right, we all agree that unborn children should be protected from conception, but culturally we're going to have to work out what those consequences look like, and what the consequences are today might be a little different than what they are when the culture starts coming around to the pro-life view?
Yeah, good question. So I think, there's a lot of nuance to that. And so, in short, my position would be that what is principally right in any given situation must take into consideration the consequences of the actions. That there's this is kind of a discussion on the nature of ethics, right? And so I think that theoretical ideology, though it may be sound and every T's been crossed and every I dotted, is not synonymous with justice, and is not synonymous with right moral action in a given context, because is much more to be considered when you're making decisions in a fallen world in less than ideal situations, right? And so I think there's a danger by those who hold to, a purist form of ideology that says consequences don't matter, you know. And so I am sympathetic to the idea that, hey, there's going to be situations we're going to find ourselves in where there is no perfect answer or no perfect solution. We deal with this in pastoral ministry and counseling all the time,
Yep.
where you got a really messed up marriage situation, and kids are suffering, and there is no easy answer. There is no perfect solution. There is, it's working through the mud and the mess of that. And so I can sympathize with legislators. I made this point at a panel discussion we had last summer, and we had Smash Mouth incrementalists on there. We had abolitionists. We had, there's kind of different camps within the abolitionist world. There's some people like myself that I'd say are I don't fight over terms. I don't demand people not use the word pro-life. I don't fight with people about semantics. And there are some abolitionists that do. And so there's kind of these two different sort of camps, even within the abolitionist world, just as of course there is within the pro-life world. And so I think there's overlap between, like you and I in being principally pro-life, being abolitionist, and agreeing that we need to draw distinctions and hard lines here against the compromise we see from the political establishment, from the weak pro-life organizations. Putting it into real-time action, like an example of what you're describing would be like what we dealt with in South Carolina last year. So we've been working in South Carolina, and after the Dobbs decision, we had a bill of equal protection, which had equal punishment across the board. There was no exemptions explicitly written into the law for mothers, right? Which is what has happened in all these other states. It's not that, they write a ban against abortion and then they call for leniency. What they do is they explicitly write mothers shall not be prosecuted under any circumstances in all these laws. So we just simply didn't do that. We just said abortion is homicide, period. And that was our bill of equal protection. And so the same laws that apply to born children apply to preborn children. The same punishments apply. And again, throwing that into the hands of prosecutors where there's discretion
But you
and
would
leniency.
see that there could be a good faith discussion between those who say,
Yeah,
culturally, if we're going to prosecute women for murder, that could harm our efforts to save children elsewhere. We may be mistaken on that, but there's room for a good faith discussion without attributing, as some have done, the worst possible motives to those that disagree.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that should be taken into consideration, because the goal here is saving lives. We want to glorify God, but I believe the way that we best glorify God in this fight is by saving lives, by actually protecting children. We don't want to create a false dichotomy, as some would say, well, we just, it's not about saving lives. It's about doing right and glorifying God. And if we save babies in that process, then praise the Lord. Well, I think that we should be calculated. That is how we glorify God, is by being very calculated in saving lives, doing the best we can to actually end abortion and protect lives. And so, I think that means we have to take into consideration political realities and cultural realities.
Yeah.
Obviously, a bill of equal protection is going nowhere in a state like California. And I had this discussion with some of the guys in that
Right.
panel. I think a heartbeat bill is a bad bill. On its face, I think it's logically inconsistent. It doesn't present the pro-life position accurately. It miseducates, the didactic function of it miseducates, and it's a tool that's often used by the Republican establishment to maintain the status quo and appear that they did something when they actually didn't change anything. In every state that has a heartbeat bill, the abortion rate is almost unchanged. But if a state like California passed a heartbeat bill, I'd be like, wow, California just passed a heartbeat
That'd be
bill?
quite an improvement. You have certainly done some good work limiting the evil done, even if it's not protecting all children. At least you have limited the evil done to the best of your abilities.
Well, yeah. What I would say is it's an indication that the pendulum is swinging back in the direction it should. That's a move towards justice from, of course, what you have now is abortion up through 9 months and probably even beyond. So I think it's an indication. So, this is an argument. That, the problem with the argument that a lot of abolitionists tend to make is they say, well, that's unjust. And so you're promoting injustice. The problem with that logic is, well, we have a culture where injustice is normative, right? We already have a culture where
Yep.
wholesale slaughter of preborn children was the norm, and we're trying to pull back and diminish the injustice. We're trying to do everything we can to minimize the injustice, and that's a very different mode of an action. And so to say that an incrementalist like yourself, or a smash mouth incrementalist like you or Doug Wilson, is no different than Planned Parenthood, is just an absurdity. A verse that's used a lot by abolitionists is Isaiah 10, that the verse about iniquitous decrees. I'm sure you've probably heard that phrase before, right? Is that's an iniquitous decree, and so you're guilty of fomenting iniquitous decrees. But you read the passage there, and motive is a massive factor in what's being denounced. And those
Yep.
who write iniquitous decrees, their goal, their motive, their intent is to suppress and oppress the poor, to deprive
That's
them of
right.
justice. That's very different than a principled pro-life legislator who's fighting the political establishment, even is fighting his own party to defend lives, but he falls short. And the best
Right.
that he can get is, say, a life at conception bill that has exceptions in it. He didn't want that. He didn't choose that. Didn't fight for that. He spoke against that. So the question
right.
where the rubber meets the road, though, is could you vote for that? And so this is the example I gave. I say so in South Carolina we had our equal protection bill. It was killed immediately, right out of the gate, just dead in committee. And so then you had the fight between principled pro-lifers and the establishment Republicans in South Carolina, right? Supermajority pro-life state, but you had the GOP They didn't want to take the hard fight. They didn't want to protect lives. They were, I think, in the category of iniquitous decree. They're trying to say, let's do the bare minimum. We don't want to protect these preborn children. Roe is
They
out of the way.
aimed at only protecting some.
Yes, they said, what is the least that we can do to pacify the pro-life
Right.
constituency? That was a wicked and evil calculation that should be said to be such. So they came forward with a heartbeat bill. The principled pro-lifers, after the equal protection bill was killed, which many of them weren't even on board with that, but there was
Yeah.
there was a debate. But they
See,
said
that's
life
the
at
problem.
life
When
at
you
life at
aim
conception
at
bill.
compromise, that's the issue. When you aim
Yeah.
at it, you intend for it to be compromise, then we have a problem, Houston. But when you are working to save all, but you simply don't have the political power to save all, and you save as many as you can while you remain committed to saving all, that's in a different category than being committed to injustice in principle.
Correct. So
Yeah.
that came down to that internal fight, a life at conception bill or a heartbeat
Yep.
bill. Now the life at conception bill would close the clinics. It would, I believe,
Yep.
save lives. Now there's a flip side. So that's where the debate is. So I had this discussion. I said, man, if I was a legislator and I was the deciding vote between, one of these bills is going to be passed this legislative session. If you do nothing, then you just have wide open abortion on demand in your state. You have just zero recognition of the humanity of preborn children, wide open abortion.
Right.
You have a heartbeat bill that's going to do basically nothing. It's going to give it the appearance of doing something, while not actually doing something. It's going to pacify pro-life angst. It's going to neutralize pro-life outrage. It's going to give an appearance. It's going to give political cover to the bad guys who are actually killing the real legislative efforts that should be undertaken, versus this life at conception bill that is going to establish at least a principle in the state of South Carolina that preborn children are valuable, recognized human beings from the moment of conception. But then there's some weaknesses with the punishments. There's some weaknesses with some exceptions, and equal justice is not fully there. Could I vote for that bill? And so what I said was, I asked the question, hypothetically, if I was the deciding vote, I know this is going to close clinics and save lives. This is going to perpetuate the status quo. These are the two options. I can choose to abstain from voting and just say, well, I don't like either bill. And I can respect that position, and that's fine. Or if I was the deciding vote, what would I do? And I said, I can certainly understand. I would be very tempted to vote for that bill. It'd be hard for me not to vote for that bill, even though principally I understand I'm voting for something and giving approval to something
Well,
that inherently
Yep.
has injustice in it. And so that's difficult.
Well, for you to abstain, yeah, you could abstain, but then you would be failing to act to save lives that would have been saved had you taken a position there. You might come back for more, but at least you are saving lives from conception. And I wish we had GOP lawmakers with more spine in a post-Roe v. Wade world that committed themselves to saying we're going to protect all children from conception. At a minimum, do that. If you want to have debates over what the consequences should be and how do we come to fitting consequences given the culture we're in, given the realities of our legal system, fine, have that debate. But there's no excuse for not protecting children from conception now.
Yeah, 100%, especially in a state like South Carolina. Again, we have Republican
pro-life Jason, it's been good to have you, brother. We're going to have to wind up here, but thank you for coming on, and thank you for your testimony in front of the committee, and it's great to have you as a friend and colleague.
Yeah, been a great discussion. Love the work you do. Got your book, Case for Life. I heartily recommend it. Excellent work. I'm still working through it, so...
Well, yeah, thank you, brother. I appreciate that, and just so our viewers know, I did not pay you to say that.
All right, brother. Bless you. Look forward
to further
discussion.
I hope you're coming down my way soon. I look forward to you visiting again as soon as possible. I was up your way last week. It was -7 in St. John's, Michigan. I don't know what it's been like in Wisconsin, but no thanks to those northern winters.
No, it was brutal. Thankfully, it's warmed up to 40. We have the great meltdown now. So, but yeah, I'll be down.
You got a heat wave right now. Yeah,
we'll be down in Georgia. We're going to be pushing our bill of equal protection there. So maybe we'll have further discussion about that.
We'll discuss it and hang out. Look forward to that. Thanks for jumping on today.
To Bless you. Thank you, Scott. Take care.
You too, brother. Thanks, friends, for joining us, and we look forward to chatting with you next time. I think it's very important that we get a chance to interact with people that are on our side. We might have differences on, but we can work together, committed to saving as many children as we can, and I appreciate my friend Jason for coming on and sharing his views, and look forward to seeing all of you next time.